According to the writer Dennis Holey, expecting life to treat you fairly because you're a good person is a little like expecting the bull not to attack you because you're a vegetarian. Bulls can be counted on to do what bulls do, and life can be counted on to do what life does, namely throw us curveballs. Despite all our best efforts to control it, no matter what we might believe about how prepared we are, no matter what we might believe about justice and fairness and who deserves what, no matter what we might believe or not about a supreme pitcher of life's curveballs, God, as it were, we all get them out of the blue, out of our control. Now, justice and fairness are core to UU principles. You can ask anybody here. And we're all about social justice too, God knows. Although I sometimes marvel that we say that with a straight face, as if we know what that means, as if it's universally understood. Justice as defined by whom? Don't you suppose the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks believed in their heart of hearts that they were acting out of a deep sense of justice? The crazy irony to me is that many of us were taught from a very early age that life isn't fair. At the same time, we were also taught to wait your turn, don't cut in line, give somebody else a chance to play with the ball. I sometimes wonder if we spend the rest of our lives trying to reconcile this dance of opposites, knowing it isn't fair and yet still shooting for, aiming for some sense of justice and fairness, no matter how impossible to define or to realize. Not long ago, I was listening to a podcast, an episode of This American Life, all about a professional theater director who staged a production of Hamlet in a maximum security men's prison, using the prisoners as actors. As I listened to the stories unfold, my heart just opened up to the astonishing beauty, the healing, redemptive power of art on these wounded souls. Of course, I didn't know anything about the crimes for which they'd been convicted until much later in the hour. But by then it was too late. I'd already fallen in love. Once I did hear about those horrors, however, ideas about justice and fairness became far more murky. Here's the very intersection of where inherent worth and dignity meets justice and fairness. It's a common chant to hear at any number of rallies or demonstrations for one just cause or another, no justice, no peace. Of course I get it. More often than not, I applaud the message and the messenger. But what happens when that injustice hits closer to home? Like, say, a diagnosis of cancer. How do we possibly come to peace when faced with an injustice like that? In my work as an oncology chaplain, I meet folks all over the belief spectrum. And from what I observe, everyone from the devoutly religious Christian to the cool, cerebral atheist, at some point along the way bumps into this wall that says, but this isn't fair. I'm a good person. I did everything right. I exercised. I ate right. I got mammograms every 6 months. What do you mean I have stage 4 breast cancer? But I'm only 42 years old. At the same moment, these folks might also espouse that other truism that would say, well, nobody said life's fair, right? The cognitive dissonance between these two perspectives can really pack a wallop to one's spirit, truly intensifying one's suffering. There are also those on the other side who will declare quite proudly from the outset, I have never asked, why me? Why would I? I look around the world, I see suffering everywhere, I see little kids who get cancer, so I say, why not me? The way I see it, that statement is its own kind of coping strategy, an attempt to construe some sense of justice and therefore a pathway to peace because, hey, it's random, it's impersonal, shit happens. The cancer had to happen to somebody, maybe it was just my turn. But what I find is even those folks, at some point along the way, will hit that wall that says, hey, but this isn't right. This is me. Heidi, 34 years old, newly diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She called the center desperate for someone to talk to help her make sense of all of this. She used that expression several times. She'd grown up in a devoutly religious Protestant home, but more recently had found a lot of inspiration in some Buddhist readings she had done. Michael, I don't understand how this could be happening to me. I'm a good person. I've never knowingly hurt anybody. I've been taught since I was a little girl to help others. I'm always the first to volunteer. I've been praying so hard and God won't answer me. I'm so angry. Why is this happening? She raises so many themes in these statements. Not only this desire to make sense of it, but who or what is God? What's prayer all about? How does life work? What do I do with all this anger? But front and center is this theme of justice and fairness. Over my years of reading and study, I've come upon this theory, this hypothesis, that for any genuine transformation to take place, it must be preceded by a betrayal and a death. Betrayal, death, transformation. We might look to the Jesus story as an example, that Jesus had to be betrayed, had to die, for the whole centerpiece of Christian theology to take place, resurrection, transformation. This pattern exists in many of the world's great myths, betrayal, death, transformation. Now, it needn't necessarily mean a physical death, but maybe the death of a belief or a belief system, maybe a political or economic system, maybe the death of a relationship if we look to our own lives, or maybe even the death of a career path. Might be interesting to look back at your own life at moments of profound growth and to see if such a moment was indeed preceded by something that could be seen as a betrayal and a death. With Heidi, as it is with so many cancer patients, her old understanding of what's true, how does life work, who or what is God, simply wasn't big enough to contain this new reality. It had to be betrayed and had to die for there to be any possibility of a new truth to be revealed to her, one that might be big enough to contain this new reality. When we really teased apart what her statements revealed about her actual beliefs, she had to acknowledge that she believed, if I'm a good person, I'll never get sick and I won't die. It's not so different, really, from a belief in Santa Claus. If I'm a good little girl, eat my vegetables and don't sass back, I'll get a shiny red bicycle for Christmas. In a way, she had to grieve the death of Santa at 34 years old. Something for all of us to consider. Can I be open enough and porous enough to allow in a new truth when this old one might not be big enough to contain this new reality? Angela came to the same spiritual crossroads, but from a very different path. She came from a path of New Age thinking, yoga, meditation, a belief in karma, another way of saying that it's a just universe out there. What goes around comes around. Michael, when I was first diagnosed, I started meditating religiously 5, 6, 7 times a day. But then my scans revealed that there was disease progression, and I felt so betrayed. And I realized I wasn't meditating for the right reasons at all, not for the peace it could give me in that moment. I was meditating because I thought it might heal me. Both Heidi and Angela were attached to a very specific outcome, namely cure, as the only thing that would somehow validate and affirm that there was indeed justice in the world. It was the only thing that would do. It would have to be the most human of all urges. Who doesn't want to be cured of cancer? But what if it's simply not in the cards? What if the most either could hope for is simply more time living with chronic illness? Or what if, God forbid, this disease does mean the imminent end of my physical life? Does that mean I'm not entitled to peace? Am I not entitled to an experience of wellness, healing, that may not include cure? How does one possibly find peace when faced with an injustice like that? Abby is 48 years old. She is an artist and a teacher. She lost the love of her life, her husband Paul, after 20-some years of marriage to pancreatic cancer. Abby and Paul never had any children. They filled their lives with their love of each other, the love of their dogs, their work, and their beloved Christian Science faith community. It was the centerpiece of their world. When Paul was first diagnosed and given a poor prognosis, even with medical intervention, despite the tenets of their faith and the admonitions from their faith community, they decided to go for it. Life was too precious not to give him this chance. He did last for 2 grueling years on treatment, but the disease did sadly take his life. And their choice to go through medical interventions ended up costing them their faith community, which was a devastating blow for both of them. He's been gone for 2 years, and Abby still struggles so desperately with ideas about justice and fairness. I don't get it, Michael. I can't accept it. Why him? He was such a good person. Why us? Why me? And at the same time, she would say, and I don't even believe in that stuff anymore, that God rewards good and punishes evil. There's betrayal and death. Her grief is so deep, so profound, so complete, that she finds herself without any hope whatsoever. No faith at all to lean on. No desire even for more life. And yet, she confesses she would never consider taking her own life. Why not? I asked. I couldn't do it to my parents. I love them too much. And my dogs, they need me. And if there is life on the other side, I want to spend it with Paul. And what if doing that meant I couldn't be with him? Old beliefs die hard. So we concluded that she still did have faith in love. It was enough to keep her here by a thread. So we started there, just perhaps laying the foundation for transformation. Standing on the other side of all these stories, struggling to claim justice, is Lyle. Lyle's in his mid-70s. He's a crusty fellow with this kind of good old boy southern demeanor and drawl about him. He's lived most of his life as a loner, an outsider, having spent a number of pretty turbulent years there. He does love to ride his motorcycle, though. That's the place he finds his peace. He also finds himself with a diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer, living in an assisted living facility where he says the subject of Judgment Day, who gets into heaven and who doesn't, is a constant topic of conversation around the elevator, in the community room, which he calls God's little waiting room. Now, Lyle would never identify as religious by any stretch, but his Southern Baptist roots do run pretty deep. And the core of his spiritual distress is, Michael, what if I don't get into heaven? In other words, what if there is justice and I'm standing on the wrong side of it? I asked Lyle if he were God, would he condemn himself to hell? And he thought for a moment, said, you know, Michael, no, I would not. I would say, Lyle, you should have gone to church more. You should have kept my day holy, but you can go to heaven. Go on now. I was glad to hear it. I asked him if he thought perhaps riding his Harley at PCH on a gorgeous Sunday morning with the sun and wind in his face, feeling grateful to be alive, might be its own kind of prayer, its own kind of worship, its own way of keeping the Sabbath holy. He liked that idea, I must say. Speaking of modes of transportation serving as a pathway to spiritual awakening, I don't know what it is about me and my 12-year-old car that can absolutely bring me to my knees, but there you have it. It's not the first time an episode with my little Prius has served as fodder for a sermon. Not long ago, I was at fault in a little fender bender. I clipped the rear bumper of this gigantic, very expensive SUV. I have also shared in the past that such careless human mistakes on my part that cost real money to remedy caused me unrelenting self-reproach. The owner of the SUV was gracious enough to allow me to give her the $700 to fix the few scratches on her bumper without putting it through my insurance. Damage on my car was another story. The front bumper and the hood were pretty badly squashed, but it was all cosmetic damage. The car was perfectly drivable. I didn't even consider the option of getting it fixed. It's an old car. I certainly don't need to spend my money on that. More to the point, I don't deserve it. But I have to tell you, in the days and weeks to follow, every time I went to get in or out of my car and was confronted with that damage again, I suffered all over again. Punishing myself. How could you have been so stupid? How could you have been so careless? I think my husband Scott got a little sick of listening to me, and he finally said, why don't you just get a couple bids to see what you're talking about to get the damn car fixed? So that's what I did. I went to a few body shops feeling so much embarrassment and shame to admit this was my fault. And that's why I'm not putting it through insurance, as if they care. And the best bid I could find was $1,500. Well, forget it. Out of the question. I'm not spending that. Around the same time, a dear friend called. I was deeply honored when he asked me to officiate at his mother's funeral. There'd be a small graveside service. Whenever I'm asked to do a funeral or a memorial service, I always feel as if I'm being bestowed with a sacred trust, and I am. And given the work that I do, as you might imagine, I always see the big picture and hold the higher perspective. The thought actually crossed my mind, what's everybody going to say at the cemetery when they see the minister get out of that beat-up old car? I wish I were lying. The more I thought about it, though, a new idea came to me, which for me was a revelation. Huge. What if I chose to get my car fixed, and instead of seeing it as a punishment or a penalty, I chose to see it as an opportunity, maybe even as a spiritual exercise, an opportunity to invest in my own peace of mind? What if I were to say, I deserve investment in my own forgiveness? I'm going to invest in grace to be a human being who can make a mistake. For me, this was huge. So that's what I did. I picked up my car the day before the funeral, so glad to have it back. Got up early that morning to drive to the cemetery. Felt kind of nice to have my car all clean, refreshed, looking its best. I get to the cemetery a little early to tend to a few details before the guests arrive. And I actually catch myself glancing across the lawn to see my car parked over there, looking its best, feeling kind of good about that. In a cemetery, the place where we contemplate the eternal and what's truly important in life. The funeral was on a Wednesday morning. I needed to get back to work. I stopped at a Pollo Loco to grab a quick lunch before heading back to UCLA. Careful to park on the far side of the lot all by myself, just to be safe. I know you know what that's like. I came out after lunch, and I could not believe my eyes. There my car sat by itself across the lot, rear bumper completely smashed. Hit and run. Are you kidding me? I can't have my car nice for a day. I don't even have the Visa bill yet for the $1,500. And now look. So much for my little spiritual exercise. So much for investing in my own peace of mind. I went out of my mind. It was as if a dam had burst. Not knowing what else to do, I picked up the phone to call Scott. I got his voicemail, and I just ranted and wailed and screamed and cried into that phone. It must have been some kind of sight to see me running around that parking lot in my good suit and dress shoes, screaming into my phone like a crazy man. I can't believe this. I can't accept this. Look at what I do for a living for so many people for so little money. I'm willing to spend $1,500 to get my car fixed. I can't have it nice for a day. And at the same moment, I'm acutely aware this is an obscenely over-the-top, inappropriate response to something so inconsequential, particularly given the work that I do. Every day I walk beside people living with real tragedy and look at how I'm carrying on. But the thing is, a core wound had been ripped open and the bleeding was unstoppable. And that wound is that place that lives within me, that lives within many of us, I believe, that clings so desperately to the idea that life should be fair and the world should be just and people should do the right thing, God damn it. And I find at this age the best coping strategy I have when a core wound is ripped open is to simply stand in awe of the power of the wound and be a witness to it, rather than try to rationalize, talk myself out of it why I should respond or feel differently than I do. You don't rationalize with a screaming baby. You pick up the baby and you hold it. You say, there, until the wailing subsides. A few months earlier, one of the chemo infusion nurses referred me to Valerie on her first day of chemotherapy. Valerie, 36, a working mom with a 6-year-old daughter, newly diagnosed with breast cancer. This is her first day of chemo. When I met her for the first time, she said, oh yeah, Michael, at first I really did struggle with why me, but I've put all that behind me now and I just want to focus on getting through the treatment. The longer she talked, it became painfully clear that as much as she would like to have believed that were true, it simply was not. She very much was struggling with why me. And the core of her spiritual distress was not so much that she had this diagnosis, so much as it was hearing the news that she will now no longer be able to have any more children. She and her husband were desperately trying to get pregnant at the time of her diagnosis. She also was very weary of trying to keep spiritual scorecards. I know, Michael, I should be grateful I have one healthy child. I have a wonderful husband and family. I'm grateful to have a good job and good insurance to pay for all this medical care. She was even less patient with those in her world who wanted to keep that spiritual scorecard for her on her behalf. Valerie looked at it this way: how many people can't have even one child? You should be counting your blessings. No one was simply being a witness to her loss, to her grief, being present for that. I visited her regularly throughout her chemo regimen, and that grip of injustice never let go from her throat. With her chemo now complete, the next step in treatment was surgery. I went to see her in the hospital the day after her double mastectomy. First thing out of her mouth, Michael, look at all those beautiful cards everybody sent me. Isn't that nice? And look at those balloons that say get well on them. I can't let this go. Those should have said, congratulations, welcome to the new baby. My little Pollo Loco catastrophe had been a couple days earlier. I took a big risk in choosing to tell her about it, not remotely to commiserate or to compare our suffering, but to illustrate the power of a core wound that's been ripped open, one that Valerie and I share, that I think most of us share as Americans, particularly those of us who identify as white, that perhaps we are hardwired to have this expectation that life be fair and just. I don't think all cultures have such an expectation. And when that wound gets ripped open and we are confronted with that deep disappointment and outrage and despair, fueled by that expectation all these years, our whole lives, maybe we need to go a little easy on ourselves. That wound isn't going anywhere. So I would ask myself, can I come to a new relationship with the wound since it isn't going anywhere, a new kind of peace with it? Can I learn to live in the tension between these two competing realities? On one side that would say life isn't fair, it's all random, it's impersonal, shit happens. And at the other side that would say sometimes it does seem like justice is served. Sometimes it seems like I get what I deserved. Karma is real. Sometimes it seems like everything happens for a reason. More to the point, can I offer grace to that part of myself that still clings so desperately to my idea of what's just and fair? Just like the crazy man I was in that Pollo Loco parking lot. Can that grace be big enough to know that that part of me might never let go? Maybe offering that grace for that wound, for that humanity, that might offer a path to peace with injustice. We'll just have to see. I'm working on it. So be it. Thank you.